So, I've been inspired lately to kind of give a little bit more background about my journey to my spiritual awakening and my development of subconscious surgery. And what has led me to follow the path that I have. And for me, in many ways, it started when I was a very young child. I've always looked at this world in a very different way than it would seem to a lot of people. I was just very sensitive to energies around me, people's feelings, people's emotions. And my earliest recollection of reading people's feelings or thoughts was when I was 5 years old. I remember it very vividly. It was in Leeds, where I was living, and we lived next to this big park, and there was these old kind of stone terraced houses. And there was, the front door came out, there was a few steps down, very short little, like a meter garden literally to the wall, and then the path, and then a road, and then a big field on the other side of the road. And this was way back when there was a lot less traffic, there was a lot less danger in the world. And at 5 years old, I could happily go out and go off to the park by myself without any worries. And I remember one time that I went out and I was walking across the park, and it was in the middle of summer. It was a beautiful, bright summer's day, really nice and warm, mid-afternoon. And the park was full of people, having picnics, throwing frisbees, playing football, all that kind of usual activities that you get in the park. And for some reason, I remember noticing somebody that was fast asleep. This, I'd say man, but I'd probably say early 20s. And he was fast asleep in the middle. And I thought nothing of it really as such, but, went over to the swings and played on the swings with, everybody there for a few hours. And then it was in the evening, it dropped a bit cooler. The sun wasn't going down, but it was kind of lower. The park had pretty much emptied. There was only probably, a very few people in the park, and with it being a very big field, there were few and far between. And I was walking back, to my house, and the guy was still fast asleep in the middle of the park. And, I kind of looked, and he was there literally by himself. There was nobody around him for quite, some distance. And I just carried on walking past. I was probably 20 meters away, I would imagine, somewhere around that. And as I was just going past him, I had clear as day, as if somebody was stood next to me. I heard this voice say, "Please wake me up." And I remember stopping in my tracks. I've had a few of these experiences. Some I'll tell you more in future videos as I, carry on this story. But what happened was I just stopped in my tracks and looked around me. There was nobody around me. And this guy was asleep, and so I kind of walked over a bit closer to him, probably a couple of meters away, and I kind of shouted, "Excuse me, mister, do you need to wake up?" And, I said it a couple of times, and he kind of came through and rubbed his eyes and woke up and looked at his watch and went, "Oh shit, I've got a date in 5 minutes. If I run now, I'm going to make it. How did you know I needed waking up? Thank you so much." And he gave me like 50 pence, which in today's money, it would be like giving me £5. Back then you could get a packet of 20 sweets for like a penny. And he just ran off over the park, really happy. And I felt really good. And this was kind of an interesting part of my psychology that day. It was quite impactful in many ways. Because, I went kind of tootling off home, really happy, 50 pence in hand, like, oh, I can buy some sweets. Drug addict at an early age, sugar and all that. We do what we do to our kids. And I got home and I ran in and I went, Daddy, look what this mister gave me in the park for being a good boy. Well, my dad was like, he kind of grabbed me and looked at me and, said, "Are you okay? What did he do to you? Did he hurt you?" And I'm like confused. I don't know what he's on about, because I've just woke this guy up and he's run off. And he's like, and he grabbed my 50 pence off me and he went, "I'm going to fucking kill him. Right, where is he?" And he stormed out the door, literally nearly taking the door hinges off the door. And my stepmother, Kimberly, kind of, stopped me from running out because I wanted to go out and say, he didn't do anything wrong. It was, it was good to me. It was, everything was okay. But it was that moment which I learned much, much later in life. This was, where are we? So about 6 years ago is when I actually learned about the impact of this event and which it had on me, which in that moment, I learned that using my gifts to help people caused people harm. Because I thought that this person, was going to be harmed by my dad because I'd done something good. And I was unable to communicate that. I also learned that receiving a reward for using my gifts was bad. And that it should be taken away from me. And I never got it back. I was never given that money back. And this was a pattern which, I became an entrepreneur at a very young age. I was buying and selling high-end home hi-fi when I was about 14. I started my first job when I think I was 12. When I had a paper round. I had 3 paper rounds, a morning round, an evening round, and a weekend round. And I also did the money collection round on a Friday. Yeah. I think I was a little bit opportunistic there as well, actually. I was maybe a little bit cheeky, I remember, because the news agents that I worked for, they were a little bit disorganized. And they had a book for doing the newspaper deliveries, and they had a completely separate book for receiving the money. And they made mistakes, and I was hesitant in pointing out these mistakes at the time. And there was several people that had newspapers which had cancelled them, and I'd written them in the newspaper book cancelled, but in the payment book I'd written cancelled, yeah. But in the delivery book, they were still there. So they prepared the papers, and when I picked up my bag, all the papers were there, and I delivered them to the correct addresses. But in the payment book, it was that they'd cancelled them. So I went and collected the money, and they always reminded me, look, it's no big deal, 'cause, I mean, it wasn't a huge amount of money, it was probably a few papers. It might have been £2 or £3 in some. I think some were £5 and £6 and £8 because they had Sunday magazines and that. And they still read them and kind of enjoyed them, but they said they wanted to cancel them, So I was like, okay, well, I'll remind them. I think I'm out of statute of limitations for this. And so I would pocket that money. And I think that earned me around about £25 extra a week. And that was probably the equivalent back then. God, that must have been, so if I was 12, 13, I'm now 48, that's 30, 5-6 years ago, so that was probably worth about £100, probably $150 in today's money, all told. I mean, it was actually about the same amount of money that it was probably just less than that. I was actually paid for doing all the paper rounds and collection rounds and everything. So it was quite a significant, extra for extra earnings. But anyway, I digress. So one thing that, I had many challenges is in business. I attracted very unscrupulous business partners, which, I would, on a number of my businesses, I set them up, I trained all the people, I built them in a very short time to be earning, a significant amount of money. My first company at 21 years, my kind of official company, where I had 28 employees when I was 21, I built it in a few months to be doing about £30,000 a month profit, which it was £2 to the dollar, $2 to the pound back then, so that'd have been $60,000, 27 years ago, which wasn't too bad. And I had an additional income on top of that because I got the commission from the sales. I was the top sales guy. One thing I taught, from a young age was, sales techniques. This is one thing that I did get off my father, which was quite beneficial. He was, very positive minded, when it came to the sales aspect. And, when I went out selling, people thought I was crazy because I would go out and somebody, because you always get no's. But when I got a no, I'd be like, oh, really? Thank you. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. I needed that no. And they're looking at me going like, I've just said no. Why are you excited? And I'm like, well, I kind of lied here because my sales conversion was 1 in 1.8, 1.6. And I mean, the average company conversion was 1 in 4. And I didn't want to say it was that high because, I don't know, maybe that was kind of indicative of my block around success at the time. But I said, my conversion is 1 in 4 and you're my third no. So the next appointment I'm going to is a yes. And it's a lovely big house. So, it's probably going to be a good value. So I really appreciate the no. Because I had the mindset that every no leads you inextricably closer to a yes. It was Churchill who said, success is going from rejection to rejection without losing enthusiasm. I have a slightly different take on that. In my opinion, success is going from rejection to rejection while gaining enthusiasm, because every rejection is training, is experience. There is no failure. There is only successful learning. This is one of the fundamentals of the law of attraction. If a lot of people allow rejection to, damage their spirits, damage their, enthusiasm, and their work ethic, and their energy goes down and down, which then impacts it further. So, keeping that pronoia aspect, you got paranoia where you think the world's conspiring against you. Well, pronoia is when you think the world is conspiring for your benefit. And one thing that I'm going to talk about in future videos, in my experience over the last couple of years when I've been doing some serious experiments with the law of attraction, and with observing my thoughts and my energies and what manifests in reality, and how I did a 3-year experiment with the muscle testing and kinesiology. It is a thing. It is a reality, and I'm going to go into more detail later. But the long and short of it is that, from a very early age, I could experience and feel other people's emotions and feelings. I remember, when I was kind of coming up, young teenager, 11, 12, 13 kind of area, I'd stand next to somebody at a bus stop and I'd turn around and go, "Your dad shouted at you this morning and said this." He didn't mean it. He's just under a lot of pressure with his job, and he's just very stressed, and he loves you, and, he didn't mean what he said. This person would look at me strange and a bit freaked out because I've just told them something about themselves, which I'm a stranger, and unless I've been peering through the window and stalking them, I couldn't have possibly known. So as I kind of got a little bit older and, I could tell people things deeply about themselves, I became a little bit of a freak show. People would, go, "Oh, do it to them, do it to them, do it to them," and, get me to do it to people. Now, one of the challenges that I experienced is, I didn't really have a filter for what was coming out. I was very in spirit, very connected to source, I was a channel, and I just allowed words and language and, sentences to come out of my mouth. And I didn't know what I was saying, but it was incredibly meaningful to the person it was being said to. And sometimes I said things which they weren't ready to receive. Maybe it was a self-admission. One thing about subconscious surgery is a big part of it, probably one of the biggest feedbacks that I get from every client that I work with is, they'll give me a symptom. "Oh, I'm always attracting, boyfriends that are emotionally unavailable, or I'm always attracting, business partners that rip me off, or I'm always attracting, jobs where I've got a horrible boss, or, all this kind of stuff, this pattern that can go on. These are all reflective of emotional beliefs. So when I tap into that and go through my testing and scanning process and establish a description of the pain, that's the first part of it. Language is powerful. Abracadabra, direct translation is I create as I speak, or I create what I speak. We cast a spell with every word we say. Whether we speak it out loud or we speak it in our mind, that energy is being broadcast to the universe. And, when you do magic, when you cast a spell, you use an incantation. An incantation is a set of words which have meaning. When you write a word, you spell a word out. So words are casting spells. That's why we call it spelling. So one of the biggest journeys is being mindful of the content and the language and, the frameworks that you are using and the words, because that's what's dictating your reality. And as I said, sometimes I told people about things about themselves which was a painful admission to them. It was something that dented their ego, and they would attack the source of feedback. And after a while, I kind of realized that, sometimes it was brilliant, sometimes it was painful. And I didn't want to cause people pain because I felt the pain that I caused, being a very sensitive empath. And I could feel it, and as if it was my own pain. And I didn't want to cause that. So I ended up kind of blocking it for a very long time. When I say blocking it, I just didn't speak it. I still felt it, I still saw it. But I didn't talk about it because of the conflict that it often caused. And this was probably one of the biggest driving factors in my whole life, which led me to do what I do. I mean, I remember at 19 years old, I knew absolutely 100% for a fact, I remember it incredibly vividly, I knew I was going to be doing what I'm doing now. Yeah, in some way, shape or form. That was when I had my first experiences. I think it was when I was 20, something like that. I joined Amway. Some of you might have heard of it. And they had a very big self-development section of it. And it had all the Amway tapes, Les Brown and, Bob Proctor and all this kind of stuff. These motivational speakers that would speak all this kind of amazing truth. And I just knew that one day I would be helping people in the same fashion. But I knew by the same token at the time that I needed life experience. I needed to have generated some sort of success in my own life to be able to pass that on in some ways. And I saw it very vividly. I knew at some time, I actually pictured it around about my 30s. But it came a little bit later, really, early 40s, which is really when I, made a big step down the path. I've always been researching and learning, from a very young age. Because of my dyslexia, I didn't really read or engage with books. My biggest part of my learning came from either talking to people or listening to videos or audio tapes and things like that. I've read literally 2 books in my whole life from cover to cover. What I tended to do with books, I got The Magic of Believing from Amway, and I would literally just open random pages and read what's on the page. As I look back now, I kind of realized that I was using the law of attraction and using the book as a live, ongoing guide to just drop the knowledge into me that I needed in that moment. Sometimes you don't need to read the whole book, to get the essence of it and the principle. So observing this, as I say, the driving factor, was humans confused me because I saw how they acted and I saw how they presented themselves, this facade, but I saw past that facade, and experienced how they felt behind it, which was often incongruent with what they were portraying. And it always confused me. Why do people do that? Why do, they portray one thing, but, fundamentally be something different? And I saw that conflict and incongruence. And that was kind of my driving force. How do I heal that? How do I help people become more themselves rather than this conditioned perspective of who they think they are? So I don't know if anybody's watched The Matrix. And there's a scene in The Matrix where Neo, is in the Nebuchadnezzar. They're going to plug him back into the construct program, the training program. And he plugs him in, and he's in this big white room. And he suddenly looks down, and his, bits have gone on his back, and he's back to his normal clothes and how he was, and he's like, and Morpheus goes, this is your residual self-image. This is your perception of who you are, based on your life experiences. Not quite verbatim, but you get the general idea. So everything's conditioning. Everything is what we have been taught from the people around us. And that conditioning, even down to our gender, this is where I kind of understand people who are either gender fluid or, transgender and things like that. Our souls do not have a gender. If we subscribe to a notion of past lives, then in those past lives we would have been male and female and all sorts. So our soul doesn't have a gender. It adopts a gender in a human experience. And I can imagine that if you've spent 1,000 past lives as a woman and suddenly reincarnate as a man, you may have some kind of body dysmorphia as far as not relating to the body you're in, having more feminine energy. In fact, there's a lot of interesting science showing that the brains, how the brains wire in different genders they're totally different. And in people who are transgender, their brains wire predominantly in the gender that they feel they are, rather than biologically what they are. So, there's two sides to us. There's our spirit, our soul, our energy. In every scripture there is, it says everything's an illusion. And I'll do a longer video on this in a bit, because it's biology that's the illusion. When we look at what we're made of, in the Quran, it says, man will look at what we're made of in ever-increasing detail, and the further we look, more detail will be revealed. And that's true. This is what the Hadron Collider's been doing. That's looking at what we're made of in ever-increasing detail. And when we, looked at an atom, and we found out there's protons and neutrons and all this kind of stuff. And what we did is we got a hydrogen atom, stripped all the electrons off it, so it's just a single proton, and then fired it down at near the speed of light and smashed them into each other to see if we can break them apart, and we did. And all the Hadron Collider is a huge digital camera with all sorts of different sensors on it to sense various particles flinging off, which are captured. And their trajectories are captured in all sorts. It's just a digital camera. It's the most expensive digital camera in the world. And what it does is it looks at what ultimately we're made of. And the thing is we don't have the ability to look at the 12 base particles that were found, the leptons and the quarks and the photons and all this kind of stuff. If we are able to break those up, the chances are they will be made of things as well. This is the fractal holographic universe. As above, so below. Everything goes up for infinity and down for infinity. So what are we if we are just a field of energy, which when we look at what we're made of, it disappears and reappears somewhere else? So this residual self-image, this is ourselves, in essence, collapsing the wave function. We create this reality around us. And I did a video on quantum physics on my subconscious surgery YouTube channel. And, I talk about this. There's a little cartoon there which explains the collapse of the wave function. And it is our awareness of ourselves that creates it. We are the gods inside us all. Again, it says that in all these scriptures, all over the planet. So this is kind of in a way that how I'd seen reality from a very young age. Since I became an adult, and relatively quite recently, and I experienced some plant medicines, in various places around the world, with doing ayahuasca or DMT, dimethyltryptamine, which is in ayahuasca. It's in everything on the planet. It's what they call the spirit molecule. And when you experience that, you experience consciousness without form. You are fully lucid, you are fully present, but you have no physical body. You are in the fractal universe. You're off in, in spirit. And again, I could go into a lot of science around that. Some incredible research, which I'll do another video on. But the first time I ever did DMT, which was in Switzerland, it's perfectly legal in Switzerland. The first time I ever did DMT and had that journey, the first thing that I felt was home, was familiarity. I'd been there before, and I remembered there was a game that I played as a very young child when I was in bed. I used to turn upside down and pretend that I was digging to Australia, and that, I was kind of digging away under the quilt and climbing down, and I'd go down the bed. And when I got to the bottom of the bed, I would literally go into this kind of deep catatonic meditation and see all these fractals and, lights and everything like that. And it was just my, potentially my pineal gland. I know there's a bit of conjecture of whether the pineal gland actually produces enough dimethyltryptamine to be able to induce those kind of hallucinations. There's potential that, fluoride calcifies the pineal gland, so that might be true in older age, but it might not necessarily be true in younger age, so there's some interesting research that needs to be done there. But it was a full-on DMT trip, because it was exactly the same that I experienced, and I was doing them on a regular basis. It's self-induced. The body produces it naturally. This is what holotropic breath work's all about. If you've done any serious breath work, you can have huge, hallucinations and trips and visions and all sorts from doing breath work. The lungs produce 60% of the dimethyltryptamine in your body. So I saw the universe as energy, and I guess this is why I was very sensitive to that energy. So this was kind of, at a very early age, how my first experience was, of humans, of emotions, as this disconnect between our core self and our avatar, what we present to the world. And I kind of knew then, deep inside me, that was something that I was going to be involved with. And when I got into the self-development side and listened to these tapes and listened to these, people say all the stuff which I kind of already knew in many ways, I just knew that at some point in my future, I would be spreading knowledge and doing exactly the same. And here I am now. So, this, in the Matrix, when Neo goes to visit the Oracle, when he first goes in, the Oracle turns around and says, "Oh, don't worry about the vase." And Neo goes, "What vase?" Turns around, knocks over the vase and smashes it. And, the Oracle goes on to say, the bit that'll bake your noodle is whether you would have broken the vase had I mentioned it or not. And the one kind of question a lot of people have, they talk about destiny and stuff like that, And if we talk about destiny and things are meant to happen, what we're doing is we're questioning, do we have free will? And I, from my experience, I believe we do have free will to some degree, although I believe there are overarching paths which we are funneled down, and we've got, various chronological or timeline decisions which can reduce or extend, the manifestation of this ultimate path. But if you subscribe to the notion that things were meant to happen, then you are basically exonerating yourself for any free will that you have. That every decision you make leads you to the same place. And the bit that'll bake your noodle is, if you do have a future vision of something, is it the vision that manifests it, or are you really able to see the future? And I'll do a more detailed video on this. There's so much that I can cover from what I've researched and what I've experimented and experienced myself. But I just kind of wanted to give you an initial insight to what was the start of my journey. And I shall be doing future videos soon, so keep an eye out. Subscribe to my channel, and if you want to learn more, I'll be back soon.